I'm Chris Carter here in Indianapolis right before the Combine is set to begin. It's a mailbag episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things of the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and especially on YouTube. Like this video if you see it on YouTube. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And Steelers fans, you see, I'm not in my home studio. This is my hotel room in Indianapolis. I have made it here. We will begin covering the Combine now. This is the Tuesday episode. Tuesday morning is when Omar speaks to Pittsburgh media. I will be on hand, be able to tweet things out from my Twitter account at Carter Critiques. There'll be a lot of Pittsburgh media there. I'm sure comments will be flying all over Twitter. So it's going to be an interesting morning to say the least. But before all that gets started, I wanted to record an episode and get an episode out to you guys because you've had a lot of mailbag questions, and I mean a lot. It's been tough to sort through all of them because there's been so many, but I picked out a few that I think would relate a lot to the conversations that I think are relevant right now. And there's quite several of them. In fact, a lot of you guys are asking very similar questions, so I apologize if I can't get to your specific one. But as always, you can call into the show 412-223-6644. Call, leave your name, your where you're from, and what your question is. Keep it to under a minute, and that helps me get you guys on the show. But wanted to talk to you guys about a lot of the Combine stuff leading up to here, and especially the guys in the front office. And we have all talked about Omar and aggressive in trades, and will he continue to be that? But of course, a lot of people are also talking about the new guy in town, Andy Weidel, and what he'll mean for this front office. To further ask that question is Troy from Virginia, who's a fan of the show and called in to ask about Andy Weidel. Here's Troy.
Hey, Chris. This is Troy out of Virginia. I have my concern and questions about Andy Weidel. There's a lot of talk about him maybe not being with the Steelers long. The general manager in Baltimore is saying he's trying to get him out of Pittsburgh. And I was thinking that, we'll be on a good track with him for the personnel side, him bringing in good players, building the trenches. And there's some concern about the Pittsburgh Steelers are not listening to him. What's your opinion on that? And look forward to hearing from you soon. Okay, thank you now.
Want to thank Troy for the question there and to talk about Andy Weidel. One, the Steelers are absolutely listening to Andy Weidel. Any nonsense you hear about that, tune it out, Troy. That's not real. But what is real is when Eric DeCosta, the Ravens' current general manager, did make a comment jokingly saying, I'd love to do anything I can to get Andy Weidel a full-time, as the head GM job somewhere else, just get him out of this division. And that was meant as a compliment because he knows that Andy Weidel is very good at his job. And to further, I guess, emphasize what he's talking about there is when the Steelers were able to get Andy Weidel, he was a guy who was up for GM jobs. He interviewed with the Steelers for that very position. And in fact, he was possibly the next in line to Omar to winning that position. And, we talked about Brandon Hunt a lot in the offseason. Maybe he was a candidate there. And who knows, maybe Brandon Hunt was second. I don't know. But with Andy Weidel being in the running there, it shows, he's a very serious candidate for that position. And so basically, what Eric DeCosta was saying with that comment there, Troy, was that he respects Andy Weidel a lot, and the Steelers are in a very favorable position because imagine going on an NFL draft hunt for GMs. And in this case, we keep talking, for example, the cornerback class, everyone wants Christian Gonzalez or Devin Witherspoon. Imagine the Steelers got Christian Gonzalez and Devin Witherspoon, and they're very happy about it. That's kind of where I think DeCosta's coming from. But to Andy Weidel as a personnel guy, a person who's going to help the front office, his scouting ability, his ability to kind of, figure out the type of guys that helped build the Philadelphia Eagles and make them a relevant contender and get them to the Super Bowl and just shy of a Super Bowl win. I think that absolutely, that's what the Steelers are looking at here as a guy who can help flip the script and change how the Steelers look in the coming years, especially when you look at the weaknesses that they've had, and that's been in the trenches. Now, this past year, they kind of fixed the run defense situationally. Cam Hayward played better. Larry Ogunjobi was a good fix, but Miles Jack came in. I thought he was a big help. There were a lot of guys who helped fill that position, but it needs to be a better presence. They need to win at the line of scrimmage more consistently on both sides of the ball. And that includes, when we're talking about defense, they need to stuff the run. They need to get after the quarterback. And on offense, they need to be able to run the ball and protect Kenny Pickett. Running the ball came a lot better in the second half of the season. Protecting Kenny Pickett also came a little bit better in the second half of the season. And that's where I see a lot of draft picks going. So when you're, what do I think of Andy Weidel? I think that he's going to be a guy that emphasizes winning in the trenches and still looking at key playmakers. Because you look at the Eagles, they weren't exactly shy about going and getting their cornerbacks. You look at Darius Slay, you look at James Bradbury. They're willing to pay the big money to go get those guys. But they wanted to make sure that their lines were secure because they knew that if they could win at the line of scrimmage, it can make it that much easier for the guys away from the line of scrimmage to win their assignments as well. And that's where I think the Steelers are looking for Andy Weidel to help them with to get in that position. So that's why you're going to hear me push a lot of offensive linemen, defensive linemen, edge rushers, even off-ball linebackers, guys who can help at the line of scrimmage, maybe even tight ends, to change the tone and the physicality of a game. Because if you have guys like that on your team, I think it goes a long way to what the Steelers are trying to become as far as an organization and a team who can compete with the top dogs in the AFC right now. That being, of course, the Chiefs and the Bengals, because they seem to just keep meeting up over it now. All that being said, the Steelers do have legitimate questions in other areas, and Andy Weidel is not going to be shy about addressing them. I want to talk about another key area, and that's the cornerback room and the defensive backs really as a whole. We'll address that in a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, so don't go away. But first, we got to talk to you guys because we got to talk to you guys about Built Bar. Built Bar is, of course, the ultimate protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. Now, Built Bars, as I've told you before, come in so many different flavors. You can get churro, peanut butter brownie, coconut almond, and so many more. They're healthy to eat as well as tasty. They're covered in 100% real chocolate, but despite having all these flavors and the 100% real chocolate, they only pack 130 calories. They only give you 4 grams of sugar, but they somehow find a way to fit 17 grams of protein in every bar. That's what you gotta go get, is a Built Bar. And you don't need to wait around for a box anymore. We used to make you order them from built.com. Now you just walk into your Walmart or your Sam's Club and you can buy them today right from the store. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart today. You can walk to the pharmacy section and grab yourself a box of Built Bars by picking up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate or coconut puffs. You can, if you're close to Sam's Club, run in and grab a 13-bar box with the hit flavors brownie batter and churro. Trust me, when you try Built Bars, you'll thank me later, because Built Bars are the ultimate protein bars that taste like a candy bar. They're tasty and very healthy for you as well. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. Wrapping up more of the point we got from Troy's question about Andy Weidel, the excitement again is to be able to fix the trenches, but also fix the trenches responsibly. Because like we were talking about with the Eagles, they weren't a team that was just loaded up for the trenches and that's all they had. They were, a lot of people had the Eagles as favorites going into the Super Bowl. Heck, both myself and Jenna Harner picked the Eagles to win the Super Bowl. Why? Because they appeared to be a balanced roster, because they were able to hit on certain picks and they were able to bet on certain picks, and then that allowed them to make financial investments to shore up the other positions and to have that completed look of a roster. And that's where I think the Steelers are trying to get with these young picks, that they can get the guys who can be the biggest pieces of the puzzle, the pillars to the problems that they have, or to fixing the problems that they have. And then that way they can go sign the occasional free agents who fill in and do well enough. in those spots. And that's where I think the Steelers are trying to build with this offensive line and defensive line right now. But it doesn't mean that they're going to ignore cornerback and other positions of need, and especially cornerback. The Steelers, as it stands, have only Levi Wallace and Ahkello Witherspoon tied up at the cornerback position. We expect James Pierre to come back because he's a restricted free agent. We've heard that Cam Sutton is very willing to make a deal with the Steelers, and both sides are very favorable with each other. So we expect that to happen. But I think the Steelers really could use a true CB1 youngster who can win in man-to-man, take away top receivers, and be a new threat in the game. The Steelers haven't had a premier cornerback like that in a long time. And I think that they've had good cornerbacks. They've had very good cornerbacks. I think Joe Hayden was excellent at times. But having a young guy who you're not paying super money for in free agency like they were for Joe Hayden, or paying decent money like they were for Steven Nelson, I think that this is a chance for the Steelers to reset things. And this was a question that was brought up by our friend Bryce in Austin, Texas, who talked about the urgency to solidify the secondary in this NFL draft class. Here's Bryce with his question right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.
Hey, Chris, this is Bryce calling from Austin, Texas. I love the show. You really help me be more informed Steeler fan and just an NFL fan in general. My question, it kind of relates back to your February 20th podcast about the safeties and more about the defensive backfield in general. Do you see under any situation where the Steelers might double up on taking either a safety or a cornerback in back-to-back picks or multiple picks, like within the first 49 picks? So, for example, maybe taking Deion Branch or Christian Gonzalez with that first pick, and then following up with another D-back at number 32 or 49. I just think solidifying that defensive backfield could be a real priority. There's a lot of good players out there. Good chance to get some good guys. So here we go. Thanks for letting me call in. Have a good day.
Thank you for calling in, Bryce. That's actually really cool to hear all the people from all around everywhere. Just Steelers fans are far and wide. We are all over the place. But if I'm being honest about the secondary question, yes, I do think that they should be going after guys who could, they should keep the door open to double up on guys. However, it should not be just as simple as, oh, it's there, let's just do it. I think that there should be a situation where the Steelers are going to keep that best player available mentality. And if the best player available in the first round is a top tier cornerback, great, you won, good job. But if you're in the second round and you're in that 32nd overall pick and the best available cornerback the best available player is a cornerback is another guy, is the best available player is another cornerback, and you're sitting there at 32, that's where I think the Steelers, would have to consider something there, because I don't think that they are in a position where they have to necessarily draft two corners. This is all also to answer fully what Bryce's question is there. This is very dependent on what happens with Cameron Sutton. Again, I fully anticipate Cameron Sutton to be back on the Steelers roster, be solid, and maybe they let go William Jackson III, Ahkello Witherspoon, and that's kind of what their secondary makeup is. And that way, if a rookie comes in, they're going to be competing with James Pierre and Levi Wallace, while Cam Sutton kind of, holds down the secondary as the leader. But again, it doesn't mean that the Steelers shouldn't consider this as an option. I just don't think that this is necessarily an option with the early picks, with all the different things that are available to the Steelers. As I said before on the Monday episode, I think that this is a very deep draft class in a lot of positions. I think if you're able to score at cornerback, there's going to be a lot of chances to score at tight end, at linebacker, at offensive line, at defensive line, edge rusher in this draft class with those higher picks. And if you throw those higher picks away on just one position, I think that you're going to regret that. Especially because, again, the secondary wasn't broken last year. They led the NFL in interceptions. Cam Sutton, again, if you bring back Cam Sutton, I think that's the key to making sure that you're still in contention for that. So all in all, yeah, sure. The Steelers I'm right on board. Keep the Steelers in line to be looking at defensive backs and how they do in the combine, and maybe picking one of them with their top 3 picks in the NFL draft class. But I do think that they have to be careful not to overinvest into that position when they have several positions of need. Still, it'll be something very interesting to watch as the year goes on. But there's a trade talk that a lot of Steelers fans are wondering about with a player that's currently on the roster and may or may not be on the roster once the season gets around. We'll talk about that in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're continuing the Locked On Steelers podcast mailbag episode where you guys called in at 412-223-6644, and you left us your voicemails with your name, where you're from, and what your question was. And if you kept it under a minute, you got a chance to be on the show. But I think that we've talked a lot about the secondary and the offensive line, the defensive line, and the plans of Andy Weidel and Omar and what they are. But let's look at the plans for a guy who's currently on the roster. And that's a guy who also holds a hefty salary cap, not fine, but a salary cap number because he was signed to a good deal by the Steelers. And now he's the backup quarterback. And the question has been what's going to go on there. And Doug from South Florida asked the question that I think a lot of Steelers fans are wondering to this day about Mitch Trubisky. Here's Doug with his question on Mitch.
Yes, Chris, this is Doug Breeden from South Florida. And I was wondering if the Steelers might use Mitch Trubisky as a trade to pick up a couple of draft picks in this year's draft. Thank you very much. Love your show. Bye.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate anyone who calls into the show, Doug, and I appreciate you asking that question. Here's the thing about Mitch Trubisky. I'm not so sure who gives up picks for him at this point, right? Because right now, I think Mitch Trubisky is receiving a decent contract that I'm not so sure that he's going to be able to earn unless Kenny Pickett gets hurt again. And listen, that's the whole point of a backup quarterback, is being ready for when the time comes that that you're called upon and you're ready to go, and the Steelers or your offense, whoever's running your offense, doesn't have to change up the offense too much because you've been paid, you're ready to go. But Mitch Trubisky's cap hit is a $10.6 million cap hit. That's $8 million in dead money that would be freed up, not dead money, excuse me, in cap savings that would be freed up if he was let go to this day, and also if he was traded. So the thing is, though, I think everybody knows that. And when I mean everybody, I don't just mean listeners. I mean the other NFL teams out there. And I think the Steelers, no, they got a good player in Mitch Trubisky. He's not a bad player. He works hard. He comes to work. He's athletic. He still has an arm. He just didn't put it together for the Steelers at the right times. And that happens. But at the same time, the question is, do you trade him? I'm not so sure you get back that much for him. I think that there's a lot of teams out there that are going to be like, you know what, we got our quarterback situation settled up right now. But I do think that, again, that cap space could be very helpful to what the Steelers need to do this upcoming season with who else they could sign. But I thought, to follow that up, there was a really good question also from Dave from Dayton, Ohio, who also asked about Mitch Trubisky and more so about who would replace him if he was gone. Here's Dave.
Hey, Chris, it's Dave from Dayton, Ohio, 30 minutes away from the Orange people. So my question is regarding Mitch Trubisky. We've been talking a lot on the show about how we may trade Mitch, get rid of Mitch to create cap space. If we do that, what then becomes our backup quarterback situation? do you think that they ask for a quarterback within the trade, or do you think that maybe in the 7th round, with one of those draft picks, we get a quarterback to back up Kenny Pickett? He has missed a couple of games this year from taking hits, so I thought that was pretty interesting, and everybody's kind of glanced over that. What are your thoughts on that? Thanks.
It's a legitimate concern, and thank you, Dave, for calling into the show to ask about that. It's a legitimate concern what's going to happen at backup quarterback. Now, there has been rumblings that Mason Rudolph, who was thought to be just gone, he was just going to go get another job, that maybe Mason Rudolph could be reasoned with, especially if Mitch Trubisky doesn't stick around, that maybe he will stick around if he's the top backup here, because let's face it, Mason Rudolph's been in the league for some time. He's had his opportunity to show people what he would be like as a starter. He hasn't really wowed anyone. I think he's had some solid moments, but I think if Mason Rudolph, sees an opportunity to be a number 2 quarterback for the Steelers, I think he'd be happy to take it. Because here's another thing that I thought about with the status of quarterback decisions around the league, because there's always washed up old quarterbacks that get picked up around the league and guys that kind of just hold down the fort for a year or so. But so many teams, I think, are opting away from the idea of just picking the quarterback that you don't have confidence in and hoping for the best. I look at the Panthers and what happened with them with Sam Darnold and a guy that was, again, a high draft pick, but you knew who he was when you were bringing him to Carolina. And there was a hope that maybe they can resurrect him. And again, I think that's the whole point, is that, with drafting quarterbacks, it's a shot in the dark. And if you hit that shot, you're going to feel the benefits for a very long time. But when it comes to finding a backup in free agency, or a starter in free agency who's more of a journeyman, who you're kind of floating around with, that's where I see there's less space for that in the NFL right now. Like, for example, if I'm a GM, and I apologize if I'm seeming long-winded about this point, but if I'm a GM and I have a chance to take a shot, especially when we're starting to see guys like Brock Purdy poke up and then Kenny Pickett gets the start, like, if I'm a GM, do I take that shot on the young quarterback that no one knows about, or do I go and get, Matt Ryan 3.0 or Sam Darnold 3.0? Because let's face it, that's what Mason Rudolph is. So I'm saying all that to say, for Dave's question, I think that Mason Rudolph sticks around and he's the backup, and maybe they draft a guy if Mitch Trubisky was to leave. I think Mitch Trubisky has the talent to be a better capable starter for a team in a pinch. But I also think he's kind of put himself into the conversation that we're talking about here, where he's not a dynamic game changer. I think he's a player. I think he's an athletic player. I think he has the potential to be good and decent and not lose you the game, but also give you the chances to win the game. But I don't think that Mitch Trubisky is the end-all, be-all of anybody's quarterback equation anytime soon, if you know what I'm saying. Just like I don't think Mason Rudolph is, and I think that he's going to find out in the market he's not going to get the money that he could get with the Steelers in a whole lot of places. And he also knows that with the Steelers, there's also could be safety there. Because how long did Charlie Batch make a career as a backup quarterback for the NFL? That's where I think Mason Rudolph could live. And here's the thing. If the Steelers get rid of Mitch Trubisky, if they find a way to free up that money and he finds a good for him. But I think the Steelers are in a position where they need to not overpay for the backup quarterback position. They need to make sure they solidify the offensive line, solidify the defense, and let the rest take care of itself. But again, I look at a lot of factors in this upcoming draft class, a lot of things going on. I think, quarterback, your starter is solidified. The question I think that everyone's going to be wondering is, how do you build around him? That him being, of course, Kenny Pickett. And part of building around him is building up a good backup. And to Dave's point, and I guess kind of to Doug's point when he was talking about trading him, Mitch Trubisky's been a good backup. He's come in. I mean, he saved the Saints game. Or no, excuse me, the Bucs game. Kenny Pickett was healthy for the Saints game. But yeah, he came in and saved the Bucs game, saved the Panthers game. Heck, I thought he was a good contributor in the season opening win over the Bengals. And that is worth something. I just don't know if Mitch Trubisky gets you more than a 7th, a 6th maybe. That's where I think it could get really tricky for the Steelers if they're trying to move on from their quarterback position in either spot. But I do think that the Steelers are in a prime position right now to decide what's the strength of their team. They already know the strengths are going to be with their defensive star power. That's going to be a big part of it. But they're going to, I think if they make the right moves, which we've talked about before, they can create the cap space to define certain parts of their roster and use their draft capital to amass young talent who's going to fill certain key spots on the roster that have been not doing so great. So I say all that to say, I think that Mason Rudolph has a chance to come back and be that guy for the Steelers. I also think that Mitch Trubisky, he could be back, but I think that the money that they would save in the salary cap by trading him or letting him go, I think it'd be worth something to look at. But again, ultimately, it's just going to come down to what Andy Weidel, Omar Khan, and Mike Tomlin see as the best moves for the team in these coming weeks. And again, the combine is here. I'm in Indianapolis. I'll be here all week long through Friday. So you're going to get my thoughts on what we see here. Omar Khan talks Tuesday morning. I'll be on hand along with a lot of other Pittsburgh reporters. And then we'll definitely talk about his comments here on the Wednesday edition of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Again, I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Thanks so much for joining me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'll be back on your screens and in your ears tomorrow talking more about your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.